Hello and welcome back. My name is Dr. Christopher Gennari, and this is Great Big History Podcast. In this episode of 10 Questions, the Indian Subcontinent, from the Aryan invasion to the Mauryan collapse. Like every chapter, we start with explaining the geography of the place we're talking about. So, the geography of the Indian Subcontinent. Well, it has two important aspects that are going to affect how civilization develops on the Indian Subcontinent. The first is two perpendicular rivers, the Indus, which runs north and south, and the Ganges, which runs west to east. Now, there are more rivers that run out of the mountains, but these are the two major rivers that are going to constantly define the civilizations we're going to talk about. And unlike Mesopotamia, and unlike in China, which we'll talk about next, these are not parallel rivers. They are perpendicular. And so they don't meet. They don't run close to each other. They run away from each other. And the Indus runs north and south, and the Ganges runs west to east. The Indus represents the only major connection of the Indian subcontinent to Central Asia. Its only major connection by land to the other civilizations we've been talking about. The Indus and the Ganges also do not connect northern India to southern India. But the rivers do easily connect northern India from the Arabian Sea to Bengal. It means once you're on the Indus, you could jump over, now it's a couple days and it's across a desert, to the Ganges. But once you're on the Ganges, you could go all the way to Bengal. So, what the rivers do is allow width, but they do not allow depth. There is no way to get from northern India down into the lower peninsula, down into the lower part of the triangle. That is India. The second aspect is the Himalayan Mountains. You can see them on our map if you are watching the video. And the reason why is they are the tallest mountain range on Earth. They're the tallest mountain range in the world, which makes them impassable by groups of people. Except the Hindu Kush Pass, which is where the Indus comes into the subcontinent. That will be called the Conqueror's Row. Conqueror after conqueror after conqueror, whether it is the Persians, Alexander, Babur, Mahmud, Tamerlane, will all come through the Hindu Kush Pass, which is currently today in Afghanistan. The effect of this is, in the modern world, is if you want to protect the subcontinent, what is today Pakistan and India, you must control the Hindu Kush Pass. Why? Because the Himalayas are so big, they provide protection. They also provide isolation. They disconnect India from the rest of the other civilizations we're talking about. So protection means the major armies that are going to go across Central Asia, the Huns, the nomadic Mongols, they don't come to India. They bypass it. They take a look to their left, they look at these giant mountains, and they keep on going into the Middle East, into Europe. But it also means India will be behind. India is not easy to get to. It's not Mesopotamia. It's not Egypt. And so India will constantly be behind the people who they're going to fight against, whether it's the Aryans, the Muslims, the British, again and again and again. India will find itself, because of its relative isolation, disconnected from what's going on in the outside world. That provides protection, but it also means when people do show up, bad things happen. And so What are the results of the subcontinent's geography? Well, we kind of just talked about them. The subcontinent is not easily united. There are no rivers to connect the north to the south. There are few connections, and so the north develops differently than the south. The north is more urban, more educated, more developed. It's richer, it's more connected. The south is more rural, it's more isolated, it's more poor. And that's still true today. The biggest, richest cities in India are mostly in the north. The mountains separate India from the subcontinent, separate the subcontinent from other civilizations. So India is safe from those nomadic civilizations that destroy the Middle East, that destroy Europe. But India is also technologically behind other civilizations. We've already talked about this. So what is the longitudinal view of the Indian imperial history? India is so old that we see patterns emerge. And that pattern is again and again and again one united India, quote unquote. We're going to call it India, but remember, today it's multiple countries. It's Nepal and Bhutan and India and Pakistan and Afghanistan and Bangladesh and sometimes Myanmar and sometimes Sri Lanka. It is India is the Himalayas to the sea, the Indus to Bengal. Sometimes it's a little bit more than that. Sometimes it's less than that. But there's a united, quote, India. And what happens is it breaks up because geography doesn't hold it together. It's too diverse. Because geography doesn't hold together, there's no one culture in India. There's lots of different cultures. Even today, there's something like 20 different major language units. They're all different from each other. Like, they're not like French and Spanish and Italian. No, they're like vastly different languages. And so India breaks up into parts. And what happens is those parts break up even more. Again, because of the geography, because of the culture, because of the diversity. And so it breaks into thousands of little kingdoms. Until foreigners show up. That's going to be the Aryans, it's going to be later the Muslims, it's going to be the British. And they look at India and say, all these little pieces are weak, but if we combine them, they would be rich, and we could get rich. So we're going to smush them together. We're going to force them to live together. And so a foreign invasion creates one united India, which after 100 or 200 years, 300 years at the most, breaks up even more, like Humpty Dumpty had a great fall, and then all the king's horses and all the king's men smashed Humpty Dumpty up even more. Until a foreigner invaded, took Humpty Dumpty up into, his waste bin and then glued them all together again. So India is too big. It's so big. It's so rich that outsiders want to conquer it for its wealth. Which is a problem if you live in India, because it means you're going to be invaded by somebody, and that's never good. So who are the Aryans? The Aryans are Caucasian chariot war pirates on the move during the Bronze Age collapse. They are literally Caucasian, like they are from the Caucasus Mountains. There's an argument that the Aryans will settle in both Iran, where Iran will get its name from. The Iranian plateau will come from the Aryans. And then they'll cross over into Central Asia. They will cross over past the Hindu Kush into India and conquer the Indus, go across the Ganges, and then head south. They enter India and conquer India's Bronze Age civilization. They do such a thorough conquering of India's Bronze Age civilization, India forgets it has a Bronze Age. It's one of those things that's just recently been discovered. And it's like, wow, wait, we had civilizations, we had cities. We had an entire thing. The Aryans so replace it, so just put themselves on top of it and replace their culture with what had been there before, that the subcontinent basically forgot it had a Bronze Age. And it's just rediscovering it now in the latter 20th century. So there's a couple things about the Aryans that we need to know. One, they are not Hitler's Aryans. I could explain why. It would take a long time, and I would have to get into racial theory in Europe in 1905. And if I explained it to you, your reaction would simply be, really? White people thought that? And I'd say yes. And you'd be like, white people are crazy. And I'd be like, on race in 1905? Yes, they were. Yes. Yes. It's going to make no sense to it's just going to make no sense. So I'm just telling you, when it comes to race in 1905, just white people be crazy. Just understand that. It made sense to them, but it makes no sense to us how they did it. It's a bit of magic. It's a bit of fake science. It's a whole lot of we need racism to be true. And so that's how you're going to get the Aryans, Hitler's Aryans, being kind of Scandinavian blonde, blue-eyed people. Now, these Aryans are from the Caucasus Mountains. And likewise, why white people are called Caucasian is tied into this. And it doesn't make much sense, but it has to do with a bit of Greek phonology and Roman sociology and a lot of myth, and it's just a mess. But what is important is the Aryans looked different than the people they were conquering. That is true. They're going to be lighter skinned than the people they were conquering. Now, you have to remember, in the ancient world, there is no racism. The color of your skin did not matter, but your culture did. And so the Aryans come rolling in with their super technology of chariots. They come rolling out of the destroyed neighborhood of the Bronze Age collapse, looking for a home, and they come into India and they conquer it. And they have a problem. And their problem is there's not a lot of them, and India has a huge population. Because India always has a large population. It's a subcontinent. The Aryans are a small people in now a very large land. And the question becomes, how do you keep from being assimilated into this larger population? If you allow teenagers just to be teenagers and just hook up the way teenagers want to hook up, super sexy Aryan teenagers are going to hook up with super sexy Indian teen girls. And what's going to happen is Aryans will disappear. There's just not enough of them. Very simply, if you go from 100% awesome and you add it to 0% awesome, and then you divide by 2, that child is 50% awesome. You do it again, it's 25%. You do it again, it's 12%. If you do it again, it's 6%. You know what 6% looks like? 6% is what the average person who claims to be Cherokee claims to be in order to get access to, like, the slot machines. Like, you can't see somebody at 6%. Joe Manganiello, the actor, an Instagram star, Joe Manganiello, is 6% African American. That's what he just discovered on the PBS Secrets of Your DNA show. His grandfather was not his grandfather. He's actually 6% African American. And you look at him and go, yeah, I don't see that, but it's there. And that's 6%. That's one man's lifetime. You go from completely Aryan to you can't see yourself in your great-grandbabies. So you would disappear. This is what happened to the 10 tribes of Israel. This is what the Assyrians did to people. This is what the Romans tried to do to people. They did it to the Carthaginians. They tried to do it to the Jews. You spread them out. You let them just hook up. You let them marry. You let them have kids. And over enough time, like sand in the wind, they disappear. So the Aryans have this problem, and they know they have this problem. They have conquered a place that's kind of too big for them. So what do? Their answer is the Aryan caste system. This is the solution to the problem. Keep young people separated. Keep them separated by caste. Now, what is a caste? Essentially, it's your dad's job. That's essentially what it is. Say your dad is a warrior level 3. So who do you hang out with? Warrior level 3s. Who are you going to date? Warrior level 3s. Who are you going to marry? A warrior level 3. Who are you going to bowl with on Wednesdays on warrior level 3 night? Warrior level 3s in a warrior level 3 league. You're never going to hang out with warrior level 2s. You're never going to hang out with warrior level 4s. And you're definitely never hanging out with priests and their levels, or shop owners, or butchers, or princes. No, you are hanging out your entire life, going to school with, going to parties of, going to birthdays with, going to birthdays of, and then being mourned by when you die, warrior level 3s. Your dad was that. You will be that. Your children will be that. What's the advantage of this system? Well, the advantage is stability. Why would it work? Well, it works because people get stability, predictability, and community. They know who their future job is. They know who their future friends are. They know who their future spouses are within a few people. They know who their kin are. And people like that their lives won't get worse. No matter what I do, I will die as a warrior level 3. I can't go down. I can't become a warrior level 4 or a warrior level 5 or shopkeeper. I am a warrior level 3. And I will be that my entire life. And that's nice. That's nice. Ask people if they'd like to work at their job till they retire. And a lot of people are going to say, yes, I want to be a Ford mechanic till I retire. Or I want to work in this factory till I retire. They just want stability. And their social group is stable. The people they hang out with are people they have hung out with since the first grade. The people who are at their funeral when they die as an old person, they've known their entire lives, which means they could borrow money from them. They could ask them to watch their kids. They can marry their daughters to them. These are people who you not only have a beer with, you watch the game with, you have Monday night football night with, you play poker with. They're the same people. They're your crew. But they're not 3 people. They're entire families. They're 100 people, 150 people, 200 people. It's a clan. You live together down the blocks. It's the way my grandparents talk about New York and the ghetto. Oh, Auntie Sylvia was down there, and Uncle Joe was over that way, and everybody was within walking distance. And they all will tell you that they lost something when they went to the suburbs. Because suddenly you needed a car. And Uncle Joe was 40 minutes away. He was across New York. He was in Westchester. And Auntie Sylvia was out on the island. You needed to take an entire day to get there and hang out and then come, have dinner. Whereas before, everyone just gathered. Another advantage, so people get stability. So another advantage is society gets a predictable labor supply. You know how many warrior level 3s you have years in advance. You know what your stable social order is going to be. There's not all this conflict. There's not all this rising and falling. And the caste system works. How do I know it works? Because it lasts for 2,000 years, no matter who conquers India. And nobody else is going to conquer India with a caste system. None of the Muslims do. Tamerlane doesn't. The British don't. They all come in with their own systems. And the caste system remains. So it has 2,000 years of legitimacy. The disadvantage of it is, what if you want a better life than your parents? The basic capitalist class desire of Europe and in the United States. How do you move up? How do you get richer? How do you do better? Okay, I can't move down. That's nice. And for a lot of people, not moving down is good enough. But there will always be people who are like, but how do I move up? And that inability to move up is a problem. It's a disadvantage of the system. It should break the system. And it doesn't. Why doesn't it? Well, because the Aryans, the Indians, understood that. And within Hinduism, there is the two concepts of samsara and karma. Now, Hinduism is this combination of Aryan religions, Aryan nomadic war gods for the most part, with the settled civilization of temples and priests of the Bronze Age Indians. And it gets smushed together over 1,000 years, and it becomes early Hinduism. And two of the concepts within that are samsara and karma. Samsara is a transmigration of the soul. Your soul returns. You do not. This is not reincarnation. And people will use reincarnation, but that's wrong, because reincarnation is like Jesus. It's when you come back as you, with all of your thoughts, all of your knowledge, and you looking as you. That's Jesus to the apostles, to Thomas. When Jesus shows up and he goes to Mary Magdalene and he shows up to the women, and the women go and tell the homeboys, and they're like, Jesus is back. And they're like, really? And then Jesus shows up and they're like, oh my God, it's Jesus. And then Jesus goes away, and then Thomas comes in and they go, Thomas, Jesus was here. And he's like, no, he wasn't. He's like, Thomas, Jesus was here. He's like, I'll believe it when I could put my hand in the holes. And poof, there's Jesus. And he's like, Thomas, come here. And Thomas is like, I believe it's Jesus because it looks like you. He's like, no. I heard what you said. You said you need proof. You need to put your hand in the holes. Well, come over here and put your hands in the holes. That's reincarnation. That's not samsara. Samsara is when your soul returns, but to a new body. You don't come back with the knowledge of your previous life. You don't come back as you. You come back new, and you do life with a clean start. The advantage? You get a clean start. You get to make up for all of the mistakes you made. The disadvantage is you don't know what mistakes you made. That's the problem. You have to do high school again without realizing how badly you did high school the first time, which kind of seems unfair. So if you're coming back, what do you come back as? And the answer to that is karma. Now, this is not Buddhist karma. Buddhist karma is that hippie idea that, hey, you do something good, and it sends out good energy into the universe, man. And like, dude, it'll come back to you. Like, that's Buddhism. Now, Buddhism, of course, is more serious than the way the hippies talk about it, but it's the same concept. Karma is much more St. Peter at the gates of heaven. It is a tally of good versus bad you do in your life. And every time you do a good thing, you get a tally, you get a point for good. And every time you do a bad thing, you get a point for bad. It's kind of like the house points in the first couple Harry Potter books. By the third or fourth book, they kind of forget that they have a house cup. But for the first couple books, those points matter. And that's karma. And if you have more good than bad, you go up. And if you have more bad than good, you go down. And if you have a lot more good than bad, you might go up a couple spots. You might go from warrior level 3 to warrior level 2 to warrior level 1. That's amazing in one lifetime. And so everyone has the incentive to be good, because everyone is either on their way up. So if I'm a warrior level 3, I used to be a warrior level 4. And before that, I was a warrior level 5. So I'm doing great. So I should keep on trucking. I should keep on doing well. Or I was a warrior level 1 who was bad at it and became a warrior level 2. Or I was a warrior level 1 who became so bad at it, I dropped 2 spots to warrior level 3. So I better start getting my act together, because I don't want to keep falling down. Because underneath the Aryans are the Indian native peoples, and they have the worst jobs. And then there are the people who are outcasts. They're outside the caste system. They have jobs that are so terrible, nobody wants to hang out with them. Nobody wants to be their crew, which ironically makes them a group makes them a caste. The outcasts become a caste because nobody wants them in their caste. In a way, they're like Hufflepuff, but terrible. But poor, no jobs, no security, no power. So the incentive is for everyone to be good at their life. That's good for society. If you're the government, that's good. You want everyone acting good. Okay, so that's our kind of brief skipping over of kind of like Aryan social issues and Hindu religious philosophy. Around 500 BCE comes a young prince, Siddhartha Gautama, Gautama. I've been told that the last A is silent, and so I will pronounce it that way. And he has a great question, and he's going to find an answer. So we have to talk about what is his question. So he is a young prince in north central India who, there's a couple of different origin stories of him. But either way, he goes down to town. He leaves his palace. He leaves his crew. And he goes and ends up seeing poverty and suffering for the first time. And he asks a question. Why do I have so much? And these people who work so hard have so little. Like, he's a young prince. He hasn't done anything yet. He doesn't do work. But he doesn't lead a kingdom either. He's a young prince waiting his turn. And he has so much. It's like Eddie Murphy in Coming to America in the first 10 minutes of that movie. Like, he's got everything. Life is great. So he asks the basic question. He's kind of asked the Job question. It's like, why do I have so much and they have so little? Now, this is very, very important because he could have done anything. He could have called up the smartest people in India. He's rich enough. He maybe could have gone to the Middle East. He could have called them up and said, come to me. I will pay you to come to me. You know, the way Philip II does to Aristotle. Philip II calls up Aristotle and says, I know you're smart. Come up here and teach my kid. You know, Philip was not coming to Aristotle. Philip paid Aristotle to come to him. That's how rich he was. That's how rich Siddhartha is. He's easily rich enough to hire the best and the brightest, bring them to him, ask them questions. He doesn't do that. Instead, he walks the earth. He walks the earth searching for knowledge. And what does that mean? Why is that so important? It means anyone can find knowledge, and it can be found anywhere. And this is 100 years before Aristotle has the same notion. Before Aristotle says, knowledge is all around us. It's even in the air. Buddha is doing the same thing. Siddhartha becomes Buddha, Buddha. That knowledge is for everyone, and it can be found anywhere. And what does he come up with? He comes up with the 4 truths. And what are the 4 truths? It's that pain and suffering are inescapable. You can't escape them. No matter what you do in your life, you are going to suffer pain and suffering. Well, that sucks. So the next question to ask is why? What causes it? Well, pain is caused by your attachment and your desires. It's being connected to things. It's wanting things, your desire. You love your puppy. You love your kitten. You love your mom. And what's going to happen? They're going to die. If you're lucky, you will bury them. Because if you're unlucky, they bury you. That's not good. No parent wants that. No kitten or puppy wants that. And that will be a bad day. There is no way, no matter what your relationship is with your mom, that you're going to be happy the day she dies. It's just not. Because you're attached to either her as a person in your relationship with her, or if you have a bad relationship with her, you're attached to the idea of the relationship you could have. And why? Why can't she just be the mom you want her to be? Well, now that she's died, she can't ever be that person. She can never say, I'm sorry. She can never say, let's go to Disney World. She can never say, I love you. Your father, too, if you have a bad relationship with your father, you will still mourn the day your father passes. Maybe not out of love for your father, but out of your attachment to the idea of what a father's supposed to be and why that person failed at it. It's still gonna hurt. Why couldn't they just be a good dad? Why couldn't mom just love me? Like in the musical Hair, right? Mary loved her son. Why can't my mother love me? So that's going to cause pain. The third truth is knowing this can minimize that pain. You know your mom is going to die one day. You know your puppy is going to die one day. You know your kitten is going to grow into a cat, grow old, and die. You know this. You know it will happen to you. So in psychology, we call this coping mechanisms. Notice how much of psychology, modern psychology, takes in Buddhism. And the idea is you can prepare for it. You can say like, well, I had my mom for 50 years. I was lucky to have that. We had a good relationship. If you're a Christian or a Muslim, you can say she's in heaven. She lived a good life. I'll see her again when I die in all her spiritual glory, right? If she suffered and was in pain and had dementia or Alzheimer's or cancer, you can say she's out of her misery, she's out of her pain, she's no longer suffering. Those are all coping mechanisms which you can use so that you don't feel as badly. You don't feel as much pain and suffering. And finally, there's the triumph of the Eightfold Path. And we're going to talk about the Eightfold Path in a moment because it's its whole other thing. It's Eightfold Path. So the four truths then have like, the fourth truth is 8 more things. But the point of this is to obtain happiness, not by being happy, but by minimizing pain and suffering, by understanding how to live with and then minimize pain and suffering. That happiness is not a lack of pain and suffering. It's an understanding and minimalization of it. You're still going to have it. You're still going to have it. It's learning to cope, to live with it, is happiness. So what's the Eightfold Path? Well, the Eightfold Path is rightness, the concept of a successful and happy life by doing the, quote, right thing. And there's 8 different kinds of rightness: the right view, the right intention, the right speech, the right action, the right mindfulness, the right meditation, the right motivation. Mindfulness, action, speech, motivation. It's the idea that you control your reactions. You control your interactions. Listen to yourself. Life is your journey. You are on your path, no one else's. This is a very individual concept. They're the old commercials, the Fidelity investment commercials, where everyone's walking around town and they're all following this green line, but they're all on their own green line. Everyone is on their own personal path. Your conflict with people is with people who negatively impact your path. Your paths have intersected, and they're ruining your ability to follow your path. They want to control your path. They want to control your ideas of your path. They want to tell you who to date, where to go to school, what job to have, because it's good for them, it helps them, but it might not be yours. And so you end up in a bad relationship, and you've known this. How many of you have dated somebody longer than you should have? And you knew it. That a point came and you said, I got to break up with this person. And you kept dating them, even though you knew you should have broken up. How happy were you in that relationship? How good was that relationship? But it was easier. Then you didn't want to have that fight. You didn't want to have that discussion. Or you had kids, or you were married, or they were friends with your other friends, and it would just be messy, or you just liked having them around to watch Netflix with. And it's way easier to be with someone who you're like, I don't like them, but they're fine, than have to go and date new people and find another relationship and start over. But in your heart of hearts, you knew they were wrong for you. That's the Eightfold Path. You know the job is wrong for you. You know it. And so the Eightfold Path is listen to that voice. Listen to yourself. All right, so now politics. So we've done the Aryans, we've done philosophy, we've done Buddhism. Politics, the reigns of Chandragupta to Ashoka Maurya. Chandragupta is going to found the Mauryan Empire, 321 to 185 BC. And he's going to successfully unify India. So the Mauryans are the kind of exception that proves the rule. They are the one native Indian dynasty that actually unites India. That starts in India, they are Indian, and they will conquer the Indus and the Ganges and then parts south. Chandragupta is a young guy. He's a peasant boy. He ends up at a school, and he may have met Alexander as a student in Taxilia, which is up on the upper Indus. There's not a lot of history for Chandragupta. It's a lot of myth. It's a lot of legend. And so one of those legends are he met Alexander, or he was a mercenary in one of the Indian armies that worked for Alexander, and he learned the Greek way of war, is the idea. That's what the Romans, that's what the Greeks will tell us. Is that true? Is it not true? I don't know. It's a story. We don't really know. But what he will do is go on to, when Alexander leaves, Alexander will leave and leave a couple of Macedonian and Greeks in charge of different provinces. He'll break India into about 3-4 different provinces, put some guys in charge. He leaves. Now, the problem is that Alexander then dies of probably malaria in Babylon, which means those provinces are kind of on their own. But we'll come back to them. Chandragupta is going to go east to the Nada Empire. And the kings of the Nada Empire were so hated, were so disliked, were so corrupt, that when Chandragupta helps to raise a mercenary army, helps to raise an army against them, the Nada Empire just falls over like a rotten tree. He raises this army of angry peasants, of thugs, of bandits. It doesn't sound like it's a real army, and yet it completely overwhelms the Nada Empire. But then he turns, if it's not a real army when he overthrows the Nada Empire, he turns it into a real army, because he then goes back across the Ganges, crosses over to the Indus, and then conquers the Indus. He conquers the Greek provinces on the Indus. To do that, you need a large, big, good army. Because while the Greeks may not have had the best army, they knew how to fight. They had modern technology. So for Chandragupta to do that, he must have a good army by this point. So he does that. His son, Bindusara, continues the conquest by going south of the Ganges. So what we have is a conquering king. Chandragupta is a conqueror. using his army to overthrow other empires and unite them in an Indian empire. What about Ashoka? Well, Ashoka is Chandragupta's grandson. And the reputation of Ashoka, who is going to be known as Ashoka the Great, so he's going to do some good things, but Ashoka captures the city of Orissa. Large city, and witnessing the sack of Orissa. Now, a sack is terrible. The city will be burned. Children will be murdered. Men are murdered in the streets. Women are murdered and raped. Men are murdered and raped. Boys are, children are murdered and raped. Everything that's worth taking is taken. It is a sack of a city, is where all of the violence of humanity is let loose on people who cannot defend themselves. And Chandragupta looked at this and hated it. He hated the violence. Now, there's an argument of how pacifist that made Ashoka, but the part that's indisputable is he no longer wanted to be a conquering king. He doesn't want to be Tamerlane. He doesn't want to be Nebuchadnezzar. He doesn't want to be Caesar. So that means he needs a new legitimacy. He needs a new way for the Mauryans to run India. And that new legitimacy is going to be to make people's lives better. That's the argument. Whereas the previous one was, I am tougher than you. I am the conqueror. I am tougher than you. Ashoka's legitimacy is, I am going to make your lives better. Listen to me, obey me, and your lives will get better. And the natural question they're going to have is, how? How are you going to make my life better? And the answer is Buddhism, the spread of Buddhism. Remember, the key value of Buddhism is happiness. That's sexy. That's fun. That's good. You could sell that. And so what he does is hire Buddhist monks to educate the people. He builds Buddhist temples. He expands Buddhism, not just from the Ganges, but onto the Indus and to points south. And so Buddhism spreads to educated populace. And then it spreads to East Asia by merchants. On the Silk Road, it will go to China, Korea, and Japan. On the water trade, mostly from Bengal, it will end up in Southeast Asia. And so because of Ashoka, because of the investments Ashoka is going to make, Buddhism becomes the largest belief system in the world through much of history. Right? Christianity is relatively small until the late 19th, 20th century. It just is Europeans. Now, Europeans go different places, but the Christianity does not make large numbers of converts in the Middle East after the coming of Islam. It doesn't make large numbers of converts in India, in Central Asia, in China, in Japan, in Korea. Judaism never wants to convert large numbers of people. It's a religion for Hebrews. It's very hard to convert. Islam is going to spread. Islam wants to be like Christianity, a world religion. But it also is going to kind of hit a maximum point around 1600 because the armies of Islam, first the Arabs, but then the Turks, kind of stopped winning. And so the lands that they owned are taken away slowly and slowly and slowly. So Southeastern Europe, despite being owned by the Turks, is never really converted over to Islam. It remains Orthodox Christian. Meanwhile, China, Korea, Japan, Vietnam, Thailand, become Buddhist. Only the Philippines will become Christian, and Indonesia will become Muslim. But through most of history, Buddhism is like this background philosophical religion that is the most popular belief system in the world. Now, there's different schools, there's different practices. That's a whole different thing. That's why you take comparative religions class. But Ashoka sets the stage for a thing that is very, very popular. And the irony is, it will be kicked out of India in our History 102 class. Buddhism, despite being invented in India, does not successfully remain in India. It is essentially kicked out of its homeland. Okay, so what about after Ashoka? Well, after Ashoka, you have weak and then even weaker kings the next 50 years. The empire begins to break up into pieces. It's too big. It's too diverse to hold together. See our geography section. And the southern parts break away. The Indus parts begin to break away. New conquerors come in. Like Greeks in Bactria try to reconquer their territories. The Alexandrian territories on the Indus. They get them back for a little bit of time. The effect is that Buddhism was not the cultural glue to hold these diverse peoples together. There's too many languages, too much ethnicities, too many languages, too many geography can't hold them together, and Buddhism can't overcome the geography. The Shunga kings will absorb much of the Mauryan Empire, and they support Hinduism. They, as part of their legitimacy, is to go back to the original Aryan Indian war god polytheism. It's to not, even though Buddhism kind of sees itself as an upgrade from Hinduism, it's like Hinduism 2.0. It's not, it doesn't get rid of a lot of the practices. It doesn't get rid of the gods. It sees itself as kind of an upgrade. The Shunga kings are going to treat it as separatist, as a competition, as dangerous and possibly disloyal. See, they reject the Veda holy books. They reject the Brahmin caste. So if you're a Brahmin caste, you like the Shunga kings. You don't like Ashoka. You were important. You were the head of the temples. Now your temples don't matter. The Buddhist temples matter. The Buddhist monks matter. Well, here come the Shunga kings, and you go, hey, Mr. New King, if you replace the Mauryans, we will help you. And so Buddhism was always on this shaky acceptance in India. Despite its popularity in East Asia, it's always seen as not quite Indian. Despite being Indian in every way. But it's always got this competition. We'll see this again when you take 102. We'll see this again as Islam enters India, and then Islam takes the hammer to Hinduism and to Buddhism. That conservative reaction to try to defend India against Islam means Buddhism doesn't have a place anymore in India, and it will be kicked out. All right. That's India. Thank you very much. Be safe. In our next episode, we do China. Take care.